Okay, here's what happened. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has publicly confirmed that he apologized to US President Donald Trump over an ad that aired in the US, an ad that didn't come from Ottawa but from the provincial government of Ontario. The ad featured a clip of Ronald Reagan warning about the dangers of tariffs, and it was clearly aimed at stirring political opinion in America. Predictably, it backfired. Trump responded by pulling out of trade talks and announcing new tariffs on Canadian goods. You probably know all of this, but it's important for context. And so Carney stepped in. He told reporters that he had personally opposed the ad, called it a mistake, and reminded everyone, premiers included, that foreign policy is the responsibility of the federal government. Now, depending on who you ask, this is either an embarrassing climb down or a textbook example of federal leadership in a moment of international crisis. In today's video, we're going to look closely at how this unfolded. I pulled 3 clips from the press conference where Carney addressed this issue directly. We'll go through them one by one, break down what was said, and explore what it all means for Canada's global standing, for trade relations within the US, and for the growing question of unity among Canada's premiers. Let's get into all of it, but just before we do, a quick note. Awake, my book on how to sharpen our collective critical thinking, is now available with an early bird discount. I won't say much here, but I'll link the launch video above it in the description. If you find this kind of content valuable, go ahead and like that video, subscribe, and now let's see what Mr. Carney has to say.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Did you apologize to Donald Trump about Ontario's anti-tariff ad?
I did. I did apologize to the President. The President was offended by the act, or by the ad, rather. It's not something I would have done, which is to put in place that advertisement, and so I apologize to him. I'm the one who is responsible in my role as Prime Minister for the relationship with the President of the United States, and the federal government is responsible for the foreign relationship with the U.S. government. So things happen, we take the good with the bad, and I apologize to him.
Now, some people will hear this and say, why is Canada apologizing at all? Why say sorry if the federal government wasn't the one behind the ad? And in everyday life, I understand that some people are dead set on not apologizing unless they believe that they've done something wrong. Whether or not that's appropriate is another question. But in international diplomacy, things don't work that way. When you're dealing with the leader of another country, particularly someone as reactive and transactional as Donald Trump, it's not always about who technically did what. It's about de-escalating tension before it spirals into something else. Mark Carney isn't apologizing because he agrees with the US president or because he's throwing Ontario under the bus. He's doing it because someone has to own the relationship. This is what it means to govern at the federal level. Carney understands that diplomacy is not about pride, but it's about outcomes. And if an ad from a provincial premier causes a blow-up in bilateral talks, then yes, the Prime Minister has to step in. Not to score points, not to look strong on camera, but to keep the door open. That's maturity, that's leadership. The apology isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign to both Trump and the world that Canada still has adults in the room, that someone is willing to absorb the hit, calm the waters, and steer the ship. Whatever one thinks of the ad, Carney did what was necessary in that moment. The next part is interesting, though. Let's take a listen. Our reporter is asking about Doug Ford and whether he had shown it to Carney.
He viewed the ad with you in advance of it going to air. Since you're the person that's solely responsible for negotiations, did you inform Mr. Ford that this is something that you did not want to go forward with?
Yes.
And what came of that?
Well, you saw what came of it.
Now, this is where things get even more interesting. Doug Ford had been publicly adamant that airing the Reagan ad was the right thing to do. He said that it was important. He even implied that the federal government had seen it in advance and by omission or agreement was essentially on board. We discussed this in another video. Check that one out next if you're interested. But here Carney is very clear. Yes, he saw the ad before it aired. And yes, he explicitly said that he didn't want to go forward with it. Now that matters because when a premier tries to reframe a unilateral decision as a shared one, it creates confusion, not just domestically, but also internationally. It's essentially an overreach a little bit. And when that confusion involves the US president and trade negotiations worth billions, it's not just political theater anymore, it becomes national risk. Carney's response here is very restrained in my view, but the subtext is unmistakable. The ad went ahead despite his warning, despite his responsibility for federal diplomacy, and despite the real possibility that it could trigger retaliation, which it did in the end, unfortunately. This is not about blame for its own sake, but rather about making it clear that Canada's foreign policy is not something premiers get to freelance on, no matter how strongly they feel about it. So now we know that Carney opposed the ad before it aired and said so directly, but the ad went out anyway, and once the fallout began, some premiers seemed to double down. We have another video on that as well. That brings us to the next question, a tougher one, which touches on whether there is growing division among Canada's provincial leaders in the federal government. Let's take a listen.
Prime Minister, if I could just ask for your clarification. You said that you told Doug Ford that he shouldn't air the ad. My question then, the fact that Premier Ford went ahead with the ad, the fact that the Premier of BC wants to put out an ad, the fact that the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, supports Doug Ford's ad, does this show that there is division within Team Canada, that the premiers don't trust you to negotiate?
I think there is, well, the individuals can speak for themselves, and they're practiced in speaking to themselves, and they will speak for themselves. There are other premiers who have different view in terms of the utility of those ads, and you can speak to them. I'll repeat what the situation is with those who actually have been talking with the Americans and have been negotiating with the Americans. That we start from this position, which it does bear remembering, that we are in a position where 85% of our trade is tariff-free. We, like every other country in the world, okay? Every other country in the world has issues if they produce any of the following: steel, aluminum, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, forest products, with 232, so-called 232 tariffs in the United States. And so that's what we're having discussions with, or that's what we were having discussions with with the Americans. That's where we're negotiating. We were making progress. Those talks are suspended. That's the situation at present. And it has a couple of implications. One of the core implications is it absolutely validates the strategy we have had from day one, which is to focus on the things we can control. Yes, negotiate with the United States. Of course, that's important. But building Canada at home, which is what this budget is going to do. With generational investments, the scale of investment that this country has never seen before, that's what this budget is looking to unlock, and to be building new partnerships with countries around the world. And there is no better place to do that than in the fastest growing part of the world that represents 60% of the global economy. We can adjust for the American component of that, but there's everyone else. So if I take it down to a little more than 40% of the global economy, ex the United States. And those are the discussions we're having. And you can see the traction we're getting. Free trade deal with Indonesia, free trade talks now launched with Philippines and Thailand, two of our largest. We already have free trade through something called the CPTPP with a number of those other economies. A turning point in our relationship with China. Progress which we have been making with India. Not part of these meetings, so I didn't meet directly with Prime Minister Modi here. The foreign minister, other ministers have been meeting with India. That's what we're doing to build our strength at home first and foremost, build these partnerships abroad, reduce our reliance on the United States. It can't happen overnight, but we're moving very fast.
Now the question here is a very sharp one. Does this show that there is division within Team Canada, that the premiers don't trust you to negotiate? And let's be honest, Carney didn't answer it, not directly. Instead, he sidestepped a little bit. And to be fair, I don't really blame him on this one. That's not the kind of question a prime minister can answer cleanly, especially with a federal budget on the horizon. If he says yes, he looks weak. If he says no, it risks being disproven the moment another premier breaks rank. Either way, it's a political minefield in this case. But a part of me still wishes reporter would follow up more aggressively, something like, sure, thanks for that, but I asked whether you feel they trust you, not what else you're doing. A bit aggressive, yes, I know, but completely fair, We still want the questions answered. Honestly, if the reporter had been using her eye of framing, one of the 6 sides of the critical thinking framework from my book Awake, she'd have caught that this was a total frame shift. Carney took a question about political trust and reframed it into a statement about economic diversification. That's not a bad pivot at all. In fact, it was strategically very smart of him to do that, but it doesn't answer the question she actually asked. And that's the whole point of framing, knowing when a response is answering a question versus answering your question. That said, what Carney did offer in response is still super meaningful. He reminded us that Canada's trade exposure to the US is enormous. 85% of exports are still tariff-free, and that tariff pressure is not unique to Canada. The talks with the Americans were making real progress before they were derailed, and rather than wait on Washington, Canada is now turning outward. He detailed free trade movements with Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, renewed diplomacy with India and China, and the deep potential of the CPTPP. We've discussed this in another video as well. In short, he didn't answer the trust question, but he did answer a bigger one. What now? What happens when the US slams the brakes? The answer is clear, my friends. You build Canada. You build at home. You diversify abroad. And you make sure no one country can hold your economy hostage. It's not a rhetorical bravado. He has to do actual strategy, and he's doing it. Now, what this whole episode shows to me, more than anything, is that governing a country like Canada requires both spine and subtlety. It's not always about standing your ground loudly. Sometimes leadership means taking a breath, swallowing pride, and choosing the longer, more strategic path, even when others around you want to swing first. Mark Carney made it very clear, Canada's future is not going to be defined by reactive politics, but by deliberate nation building. And that's why the upcoming federal budget is going to be so important. We're talking about generational investments that kind of shape not just GDP figures, but actual lives and choices of Canadians for the decades to come. That's what I'm really looking forward to. That's what we'll be digging into here very soon as well, as soon as it comes out. So if you're interested in understanding where Canada is headed, not just this week, but the decade, stick around. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Do you think the apology was the right move? Was Carney showing maturity or giving too much away? Let me know in the comments, and as always, if you enjoy this kind of thoughtful breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out Awake, my book on how to think clearly in an age of noise. You'll find the link below. Until next time.